Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to have a look at health and safety regulations and how it applies to product design A-level exam content and coursework as well. Parts of this are going to seem a little bit obvious of things we kind of got to state, because some of them are a bit common sense, but some of them are, there's very specific bits of legislation and sort of things you need to make sure you are aware of. Just a sort of general overview of what you need to know. You're going to need to know who BSI are, so the British Standards Institute, so who they are and what they do, who the International Standards Organisation are, same as BSI, who they are and what they do. You're going to see quite a lot of abbreviations in this video, so just be aware. Then what RoHS stands for, the different kind of directives and laws you have, things like batteries, plastics, packaging, and what different labellings and things that you might find on packaging and products mean. So to begin with, health and safety, why? So, common sense, you can't assume exists anymore, okay? Is the whole point of health and safety is to protect you, your workers or colleagues, whoever you work with, subcontractors, customers that are going to use your product or your service, members of the public, anyone that's going to be involved around anything that you do, you've got a duty of care to make sure that they're being as kept as safe as possible. There is a bit of legislation that's in place called the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. That's going to come up quite a few times. But more than that, it's good business practice to make sure you're following health and safety laws, because if you flout the laws, you're likely to have very poor staff retention. Customers are very unlikely to go to you. It's very bad publicity. I will show you a couple of examples of big companies that have flouted laws and had huge, hefty fines, like millions of pounds worth of fines. Worse still, I say it can lead to things like poor health, like illness, injuries, in extreme cases, death, because that does what it comes down to. If you're doing a dangerous activity and you've not regulated the health and safety side of it, the extreme level would be that it results in death, which is a horrible thing, obviously. You can also be prosecuted. There are instances where people who have flouted health and safety and someone has got injured or, as we say, lost their life, who then have to serve lengthy prison sentences for it, because it's a legal requirement to make sure you're following those laws. Now, we are going to see something called HSE, which stands for Health and Safety Executive. So, in fact, what I'll do now, just quickly, you can Google this and get it for free. Let me just find it. There we go. So this document is completely free. So HSC, if you just type in HSC, this is specific to engineering workshops. Essentially what it gives you is a breakdown of all the sort of things that you have to do as a person that runs a workshop, whether that's an employer or a college or a school or whatever it may be, of certain rules there are around different things. So things like lighting in the room, lifting equipment, different kinds of machinery, different kinds of extraction. So we know for a fact that things like welding and laser cutting, we've got extraction in place, and the fact that we've got risk assessments next to each machine, and you've got ear defenders and goggles, and all those types of things are there for a reason, because we've been told they need to be there to ensure that you're as safe as possible. So I won't go through the whole document. I'll talk through part of it in the PowerPoint anyway. But it is there. You can Google it. You can find all the information on there. It'll show you how to do risk assessments and that sort of thing. So this is the HSC, Health and Safety in Engineering Workshops. They do loads of other things, not just workshops. But just want to make sure you're aware of that. Okay. So, next. So the Health and Safety at Work Act came into play in 1974. Basically, this is a piece of legislation which ensures general public health and safety in the workplace. So it places a wide range of duties on the employer. So that would, or it may also be like teachers, heads of department, that sort of thing, to ensure that all measures are as far as reasonably possible you reduce the risk. That doesn't mean you can't eliminate all risk. If you're doing an activity, there's a chance you're going to get hurt. Okay, if you do something in the workshop, there's a chance you're going to hurt yourself. Okay, depending on what it is. If you're doing welding, there's a chance you're going to burn your skin, or you'll hurt your eyes, or if you're going to use a bandsaw, there's a chance you're going to nick your fingers, or on a lathe. Everything's got some risk. What the responsibility is to try and reduce that risk as much as possible. So there is, as we say, certain legislation that comes into place that you must do. So the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations Act basically tells you, here's a list of things that employers must do. Okay, so things like they must assess the risks to ensure that any risks that come up are looked at and try to be reduced as much as possible. You've got things like review and protect like any assessment measurements or anything like that. Sorry, my phone keeps going off. That's really annoying. I'm just going to put it away. Things like making sure you've got employees that are trained correctly, or you've made sure that you've got risk assessments put in place, or you've got general health checks that happen. So there are loads of things that we are required to do, much like you will see me in the workshop when I'm doing things like changing blades on machinery and that sort of thing. So the cost of bad health and safety. So this again is taken from the same HSE document, basically talking through the general reasons why we have to follow it across. So basically, due to health and safety, there are loads of different things that can happen. At the extreme length, obviously, someone can lose their life. But as I said, millions of days of work are lost each year due to bad workplace illness or injury. So according to HSE, 1.4 million workers suffer from work-related illness in 2017-18, and 144 workers were killed at work, which is an astounding number. Statistics also reveal 30.7 million days were lost to workplace illness and injury, and the cost of the economy for such injuries in 2016-17 was around £15 billion. So that's due to illness or injury caused by health and safety issues. So work-related illnesses and injury can not only impact the quality of life, but it can also financially damage your business, impact your productivity, and harm your reputation. Things like reputation are very hard to recover from. It takes a lifetime to build up a good reputation. It takes one incident to ruin that reputation. So there's so many different reasons why companies, colleges, like institutions anywhere, should aim to adhere to or exceed expectations with all their health and safety. So a couple of examples of where health and safety has not been followed and what it results in. So I personally am not a fan of roller coasters. I'll go on the spinning teacups and that's about it. But in the summer of 2015, a number of riders on the Smiler roller coaster at Alton Towers suffered serious injuries when it crashed into other cars on the track. Not only was the impact on them severe and life-changing, with several undergoing amputations, so people have ended up with life-changing injuries, like disabilities, those sort of things, but HSC investigators found the main cause to be lack of robust health and safety measures in place to stop staff making errors, which led to the crash. As a result, Merlin Entertainment, who's the parent company, was fined £5 million. Alton Towers was subsequently suffered a slump in trade and profits, which forced the company to ask the government for a review of its annual bill rates to ensure that, basically a bailout, that they survived. I don't know if anyone will remember this. I remember this very, very vividly. And it's one of the reasons why I will not go to on a roller coaster, because they're death machines. But cool thing to take out of that, because of poor health and safety, the company is basically saying there's errors that have made staff not be able to do what they've been able to do properly. Now there was no other information than that, so it might have been that they weren't trained correctly or the correct procedures weren't in place. But as a result, that's £5 million fine. And then basically, as soon as this happened, no one was rushing to go to Alton Towers to go and try any rides again straight after that. Absolutely not. Okay, so how most accidents and cases of work-related illness arise. So basically, here are just kind of the most common sort of injuries that can happen with what you're doing. So about half involve lifting or moving goods. So you've bent down, you've picked something up, it's too heavy. Back injuries, shoulder injuries, those sorts of things. Things like slips, trips and falls. So you've got cables that are in the way, or wet floors, that type of thing. Non-movement accidents usually arise from use of machinery. So this is about 10 and 15% of all accidents. So you're using a piece of machinery and something's happened, you've nicked your finger, you've not clamped something into place, you've got clunked in the head, that type of thing. Electrical accidents, they're not uncommon and frequently potential for more serious injuries than those recorded. Electrical injuries those are the ones where if anything that happen, electricity will kill you. You always think, like in cartoons, you touch something electric and shock, and you see their skeleton. In real life, you just drop dead. Electricity is something not to mess with. Most common occupational diseases are dermatitis, which is like skin disease, deafness, asthma, vibration, white finger, and back, hand, arm, shoulder, and neck problems. Deafness obviously is to do with decibels in the room, hence why, again, in college we have things like ear defenders, asthma from dust, again, extraction. So there's things you can do to stop these. Vibration, white finger. When I went on a health and safety course last year, I think it was, vibration, white finger is that if you're using a piece of equipment that vibrates for a long time, if you've never done something before and it's doing a lot of vibration, you stop and afterwards your hand's still throbbing, that's nerve damage. If you do that for a prolonged amount of time over like weeks, months, years, that will keep happening and the nerves will just die in your hands or whatever it may be. So again, there's certain machinery maybe shouldn't be used anymore, or there's other PPE that should be used. And then in any particular workshop, risks which are relevant should be assessed. Those most likely to be commonly include things like people moving around, goods and vehicles around workshop, manual handling, machinery safeguarding. So that's why we've got guards on machines. That's why things need to be clamped in place. That's why we've got risk assessments up. Hazardous substances. So we'll come on to COSH in a little bit. That's basically the yellow cabinet we've got in the workshop based on substances that cannot be out because if inhaled can cause issues. Noise and vibration. And then the cost of accidents and ill health to small engineering workshops is really quite high. That's why it's worth making sure you are investing in extraction, cost regulations, making sure you're getting all these things put into place, because if you don't, yes, it costs a bit of money now, but if you don't, the fines and potential lawsuits can be huge afterwards. So, risk assessments. So as I said, we've got those in the workshop next to each machine, and I've got general workshop risk assessments for all activities, but just to look at the kind of things that go into it. So this is from the Health and Safety Executive as well. It's in that document if you want to have a look in more detail. But basically the 5 steps to looking at it. So look out for the hazards, decide who might be at risk from it and how, evaluate the risk and whether it's something that needs to be done or not, record your findings and review the assessment from time to time to review whether it can be changed or not. There's no hard and fast rule for how risk assessment should be written. There's no like one and only template. The template for how you do it is basically as long as it's clear. If there is an issue, say if someone gets hurt, HSE will send someone in to come and evaluate and check that all those risk assessments are in place and you've assessed and you're deemed to have done everything. Because sometimes accidents happen, people do get hurt. What the first thing they'll do is they'll ask for a risk assessment. They'll check, okay, so what precautions have you put in place to prevent or reduce those risks? If they're all in place, sometimes they'll just say, okay, this was a genuine accident, nothing could have stopped that, everything was as it should be, and it's just one of those things. That's like best case scenario. Well, best case scenario is no one gets hurt. Second best case scenario is that happens. Worst case scenario is I've got no risk assessments, I wasn't even paying attention, and suddenly he's dropped his hand off. That type of thing. So then we've got things like instant action checklist, or sort of things that we can look at. Some of them apply to things we have in college, some don't. But things like checking you've got guards on machines. I basically do these checks every day when I go I come in the morning, I walk around the workshop, I sort of check most of these things that apply to us. But we're making sure you can check guards are on machines, vibration levels of things, making sure brakes stop in time to make so. There's things like the bandsaw, if you turn it on, turn it off, it should take less than 10 seconds for the blade to stop. So there's loads and loads of little ones. Not all of them relate to things specifically to college. Some of them are to do with different types of machinery we might not have. But it's just good to have a look through and see the kind of things that we need to be checking. So with risk assessments, basically, generally speaking, you sort of have like 3 levels of risk: high risk, medium risk, and low risk. So high risk control measures are insufficient and immediate action is required. So that might be there's a serious chance that someone is going to get hurt. That might be that you need to, if you know something's a high risk piece of equipment, and that might need to be like 1-to-1. That's why if I'm doing something with you on the lathe, I'll make sure it's me and you only, or same with welding, that type of thing. Medium risk, so there's control measures are insufficient and additional requirements are needed. Then low, so existing measures are sufficient and no further action is required. So basically, it's a case-by-case thing of what you're trying to do. So what are the risks? Is it something that is genuinely like a risk of someone getting seriously hurt? Not so much. And you can try and make a judgment call of where you think it lies. And then what can you put in place to sort of reduce that risk? Because as I said, you can't always eliminate the risk, but what you can do to reduce that risk. Okay, so next we're going to have a look at, you can see a few companies now and a few different symbols that you'll come across, is what can you do to ensure products and services are held to a good enough standard. So you've got things like quality control and quality assurance. So these are basically in the manufacturing process, and we'll cover this in another video on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed. is quality control and quality assurance are two processes that are done during the manufacturing process to ensure that the thing that they've made is done to the right standard. And there's a few different checks you can do. So things like quality control, you'll check that things are done accurately, you'll check that the sizes are right, the weights are right, how fit for use it is. Quality assurance is when you're checking things like the materials, the equipment, you're training your staff to make sure that things like Alton Towers, so your quality assurance, but you're making sure that people know what they're doing. So here are a couple of symbols you may, or hopefully you've probably seen these quite a lot. Some of them you'll probably see on a day-to-day basis and not even realise. So the BSI kite mark, so that's this ice cream looking thing. So that is the British Standards Institute, also known as the kite mark. So it is obviously British, but it is also worldwide regarded as like one of the highest standards of safety. You'll find that anything that is made in and sold and used in Britain has to have the British Standards kite mark on it. The line mark, so this is specific to toys, so this is the British Toy and Hobby Association. So this basically means that depending on the age bracket is, it's been tested, so this toy is suitable for 1 to 6 months, 2 to 3, 4 to 8, whatever it is. So there's certain tests for things like toys. Unsuitable for under 3s. Again, this will go on under the whole British Toy and Hobby Association sort of thing, is they'll do the checks and they'll determine, okay, there are parts that are too small in there, or someone might trap a finger or anything like that, so you need to put on there not suitable for under 3s. And the CE mark, in the same sort of vein as the British kite mark, but it is for the European Union. Now, obviously Brexit has happened and forever ongoing, who knows. So this, it stands for Conformity European, because it's in French, because they're based in Belgium, I think. Don't quote me on that. So basically, if anything is made and sold in Europe, it needs to be tested by the CE mark. You will find typically things like the CE mark and the BSI mark. Yes, we're not in the European Union, but we'll still have our British kite mark anyway, but we'll also probably have quite a lot of CE mark stuff on there as well. Stuff that doesn't have those marks will mean that it's probably, 1, a knockoff, and 2, probably hasn't met safety standards. So actually, if people were to hurt themselves, someone's going to get a lawsuit. So it's just examples of some quality control and quality assurance checks that can take place. So things like a piece of furniture, so you might have visual checks for things like materials, surface finishes, joints, checking they're all right, legs and frames checked, making sure it's all nice and secure, destruction testing, so you're sitting on it making sure nothing's going to break. Quality assurance might be like making sure that everything is the right size and shape it should be, the patterns for the base and the back are all correct. Quality control for things like calculator, so visual checks for faults in material, making sure the buttons and surfaces are all correct, bit of wear and tear, making sure it's all correct. And then quality control for greeting cards, so making sure your die cutting, like everything is all in place, your colour, everything, all your machinery is working correctly, so it's all cutting out accurately. So those are just some examples that from 3 very different products, the kind of checks that can be put in place. Okay, so the British Standards Institute, talked about them already. So they are BSI and they have their kite mark. It's important to note, companies have to pay to have their products tested. Okay, it's not funded for you. If you want to sell something in Britain, you better pay. You've got to have BSI test it and give it a stamp of approval. It's giving the customers, as assurances that it's actually met these standards and it is safe to use. So how are standards actually made? Well, standards typically are put together by, you'll have, depending, because there are so many standards, I'll show you in a minute a few examples. Industry experts, consumers, research organisations, government departments and more all come together and basically agree on a certain set of standards over a certain amount of time for every single kind of product and surface. What sort of standards are we expecting? So this is just a very small example. There are thousands and thousands and thousands, possibly millions of different British standards covering so software testing, structural concrete, electrical cables, travel adapters. There are so many different things it could be on, but it's written basically as BS, because British Standards, and then a 4-digit number, okay, depending on what it is. I don't know if there's any logic to what the number is, if it's just the next available number, or say 8 something 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 will all be around electronic things or that sort of thing. But yeah, if you see, it'll be BS and then 4 digits. So a few other ones that we'll come across. So we've got the ISO. So we've covered British standards and CE. ISO is the International Standards Organisation. So that's if you want to do things internationally. So not just in Europe or in Britain. So if you say you've got a product that you're selling in Britain, works really well, and you go to Europe, again, works really well. You want to go global, you want to go America, you want to go Asia. Ideally, what you need to do is have the ISO test it. It's not compulsory, but it's one of those where it's not compulsory, but if not, shops probably aren't going to accept it and sell it unless they've got that seal of approval. Next, you got RoHS, which stands for Restriction of Hazardous Substances, which is really difficult to say quickly. So this is saying that essentially there's a list of 10 materials that cannot be used, or you need to restrict the use, right? They can be used, but you have to be very careful with them in electronic products. So of those 10, 4 of them are metals. So that's things like lead, mercury, cadmium and chromium. So obviously they're still used bits, but we know for a fact that lead and mercury are incredibly poisonous. Excuse me. Then you've got something called the Battery Directive. So this deals specifically with restrictions of hazardous substances and the safe disposal of batteries. So that's why you can't just put batteries in the bin. Obviously, if you put like a AA battery in the bin, the SWAT team aren't going to come crashing through the window and arrest you. But like big companies, and ideally you shouldn't be doing that with batteries anyway. But that's why if you go to the dump, the tip, there's a whole section for like electronic products and batteries and that type of thing, because they have to be disposed of in a particular way. FSC. So this falls under like packaging directives. So basically aims to promote and show that material has come from a sustainable source. So FSC stands for Forest Stewardship Council. Any paper-based product, timber, toilet paper, that sort of thing. The WEEE directive. So waste from electric and electronic equipment. So basically it covers the end of life of electronic equipment. So making sure things are disposed of properly. So you'll find some of these go hand in hand. So things like the battery directive, the WEEE directive, typically a product will be covered by both of those. The EC energy label. So this is compulsory on household appliances. Buildings will have EC energy labels, fridges, microwaves, dishwashers, those sorts of things. We go from A plus down to, I think it goes lower than D, I think it goes to E. If you look at the college building, because it's quite an old building, you'll find that we're way down at the bottom. That's to help you make an informed decision. If you live in a new build house like I do, you probably find you're probably higher up at the top sort of thing for your building. But it also means that, like, obviously if you're a college student, you don't pay bills, you don't care. But when you move out on your own and you start paying for things, you'll suddenly care quite a bit. Things that are energy efficient cost you less money. Something, if you get like a toaster or a kettle and it's an A+++ compared to like an E, the price you're going to pay to use that in terms of just the energy consumption, because it's so poor, is going to be massive. Then you got EU Ecolabelling. So this is a voluntary environmental certification. So basically this is, there's a certain set of high standards of excellence that have been set out, and if a company meets those, then they sort of qualify to have that sticker on them, sort of a pat on the back, well done, and it looks really good for them. Then you got the EU Energy Star. So it's an agreement between the EU and the US to standardise how IT equipment is labelled and used to show that things can be shared between them, disposed of nice and easily. Because the big problem a lot of companies and products and services have is communication with each other, of like labelling all being different, and if labelling is different, things won't get recycled correctly. So it's just kind of, if we can all agree to a certain set of standards, the better really. I mean, the US still use the imperial system, so we'll move on from that quite quickly. So, COSH, Control of Substances Hazardous to Health. Very important scientists, as you can see. So this is, simply put, is how do you control dangerous substances, because sometimes you've got to use them, because these are solvents. So you'll find this in product design, you'll also find this in things like chemistry, biology, maybe a little bit in like medical labs, that sort of thing. If anyone here has things like diabetes, where they have needles and you have the Sharpies bin, you'll notice that that's yellow for a reason, and it has all those labelling on there. You'll also find things like solvents, so anything that's chemically based has to be stored in there as well. There are certain like rules for things that need to be found in there. So making sure that all labels can be looked at really easily. Protective equipment, so things like ventilation, gloves, goggles, that type of thing. Chemicals should never be mixed. There are certain chemicals that need to be mixed to have your exothermic reaction, things like epoxy resins, but you shouldn't store those next to each other in case there's a leak, that type of thing. You should never put chemicals in bottles that have other uses. So you should never put a chemical in like a plastic drinking bottle, because if there's no clear labelling on it, people don't know what's in it, and then obviously hopefully no one drinks it, but it's a big risk. Basically what you need to know is you have your cosh cupboard, which is that yellow colour. In that cabinet, she says, should then know what's in it. You should have the risk assessments or the data sheets for them. What are those risks? Most commonly, it's things like good ventilation. So that's like nice open spaces with windows open if possible. If you can't have good ventilation, sometimes masks are appropriate. Gloves, goggles, and then there's things like if it comes into contact with your skin, it's making sure that you can go and have a wash station properly and make sure that things are washed up correctly. So PPE. Now, obviously, PPE is a lot more common now because of things like COVID that are in place. So there was a time a while ago where it was impossible to get masks for a workshop because suddenly everyone was buying masks. But PPE stands for personal protective equipment, and that does cover things like masks, goggles, ear defenders, hard hats, high vis, and that type of thing. So it's all those sorts of things that you can buy to help reduce the risk of something happening. That doesn't mean that if you've got those equipment you can ignore other health and safety rules, but they're there to sort of help protect from things happening. That's why if you see in the workshop most of the time, I'll have my steel toe cap boots on. I'll also, if people are doing certain things, I'll have masks on, because if you're in a college workshop, you're only in there for like an hour or two a day, if that, and then some days you won't be in there a lot at all. Whereas I'm in there most of the day, so me breathing in that sort of thing is a lot more detrimental than you, but we should all assume the same sort of level of risk. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the toy. So a while ago I showed you the lion mark. So I just want to show you. So this is one particularly the BS EN71 series. So this particular two children's toys. So basically, they're sort of like go-to document of children's toys and safety. So a little bit of like top tips. So obviously things like children can choke on small items, that sort of thing. So that's why you see the things like not suitable for 0 to 3s. I don't know if anyone's got any young siblings or family members. I've got a toddler, and pretty much everything, as soon as she touches it, it'll go in her mouth because it's food. I want to play with it. It's fun. Obviously things like supervising children when playing with like older toys, avoiding toys with strings and straps for infants, things that can get moved into certain parts. There's certain rules about entrapment, so making sure that there's toys where children can't actually get physically trapped in them as well. Discarding plastic wrapping, follow instructions. So obviously, again, this is where we talk about sometimes health and safety can be a bit of common sense, but they are important rules to follow. So this is taken from the actual BS document of sort of the things that come into place. So it'll give you sort of the list of the new directives that come into place. So this is to ensure that manufacturers and importers face new obligations to ensure that no unsafe toys enter the market. From July 2013, the accessible parts of toys must no longer contain heavy metals such as lead. So that is part of the RoHS. Fragrances that are likely to cause allergies are forbidden from July 2013. So they're always ongoing documents. I think I've got like a 5 or 7 year cycle in my head. I'm not 100% sure. Basically, on a certain cycle, British standards have to be reviewed. Sometimes they're reviewed and no changes are made, and sometimes they're reviewed and new amendments are made as well. And I'll talk about, basically, as we've seen before, is the sort of labelling you'll see on there. So CE mark, obviously, we've talked about. The line marks that lets them know that it's been meets the requirements for BS EN 71. And then 0 to 3, they put age restrictions. The same sort of way. Obviously, it's slightly different when you're a bit older and you see like 15 and 18 on things like computer games or movies. But they're still there. It's the same sort of principle. It's not really appropriate for someone under this age. Please just make sure they're not doing it if possible. Okay, so just a little thing. Can you figure out what those hazards are? So pause the video, sort of write in what you reckon they are, and then I'll flip over the screen for you. Okay. Now, there are a huge amount of different pictograms. I can't possibly show you all of them. It would be a bit of a waste of time. But it's understanding generally what they're there for. Typically, they are diamond and then red outline and then an image. They try and avoid text because it means that they can be used globally without any like language barriers. And you'll find some around college where with it's like chemistry, biology, or product. Some more than others, but you may see some out and about on a day-to-day basis as well. Okay, so obviously, health and safety is going to come up in paper 1, which is the 2.5 hour paper. So there's quite a few different questions to go through. I will go through exam technique in the actual lesson in person as well, but just an example question for you. So what responsibility do manufacturers have to ensure the safety of employees? So if we just have a little look through the keywords in there. So responsibilities, manufacturer and safety of employees. 8 marks. Do you need a summary? Probably not. It doesn't mention about a summary or an evaluate or anything like that. So 8 points. So you need 8 marks. Sorry, so you need 4 points with evidence or examples. Pause the video. Have a go at answering it, and then I'll put the answers on the screen. Okay, so there's a huge amount of this. This is not an exhaustive list either as well. But training for employees with specialist equipment, PPE, making sure there's no things like entanglement, like clear working spaces, no tripping hazards, protective aprons being worn, first aid training, first aid points like bandage and things being put into place, machines fitted with things like emergency stops, data sheets being available for cash, manual handling guidance. So there's a huge amount of things. So as long as you make sure you bring up the point and then you explain why that might be a good thing to have for employees as well. That is the end of health and safety regulations. If you've got any questions, please let me know and I'll get back to you.